Good morning and welcome to the SitRep for today, the 25th of February 2023. I'm Gads, this is Ragnarok Survival. This is the Situation Report, or the SitRep, where I go through stories that I've found over the last couple of days and we talk about it from the perspective of prepping. So everyone who joined me yesterday when I was meant to do this SitRep obviously got caught up with some questions, some really good questions that were came through via Instagram. So I ended up answering them and having a bit of a rant about that sort of stuff, which was good. But now I'm going to catch up with those stories and a few more that have popped in, mainly centering around what's happening in that Ukraine type area, what's happening with China at the moment, some developments over that overnight that I'll get to, and a few other things about food supply sort of stuff that's coming in that looks a bit disturbing. Rumors and photos and videos and stuff like that that are popping up on the internet at the moment. So we'll have a chat about that. Good morning to everyone who is joining me this morning on YouTube, Instagram, or whether you're listening to this later on via the audio version. All right, let's talk about China to start off with. There's been a bit of chat that's going on around here about China increasing its support for Russia, and there's been some developments overnight too. So bear with me. I've got kind of a disjointed amount of stories, and I might cycle or circle back to stories that I start talking about as I'm going through other things, because I've got like a whole bunch of different pop-ups here that I need to go through. But anyway, there's been a bit of a meeting between some top executives, some top diplomats from China and Russia. So we can see the strengthening of the ties between these two countries, and that was touted originally mainly as a, I guess, what would you call it? Financial, economic decision, trade sort of decision. But then all of a sudden, a lot of talk, which actually was instigated from the Western propaganda machine, if you were paying attention, started coming out and saying China, as I've said, if you're tracking Western propaganda, as I do, by the way, I just call it that. I call pretty much anything mainstream media propaganda. But the Western propaganda machine has been increasing its anti-China sentiment of late. So we've seen that increase go on, and that's interesting in of itself. That this is the sort of stuff that I like to look at. It was very, very hot a couple of months ago. They were like, China bad, China bad, China bad, Taiwan, they're going to move on Taiwan. And then it just did a 180. And they're like, everything's cool, everything's fine. We don't need to worry about this. And we saw a little bit of an uptick again, and then balloons, and it's back on again. So it's back on the table. So a lot of developments that are happening in around US sentiment towards China in the perspective of what's going to happen with Taiwan, but what is also happening with China and Russia. Now, so take this with a big old pinch of salt. This one, because essentially what I've seen is the increase in anti-Chinese sentiment from US. So to aid in that, I think they're also tying it to Russia, guilt by association. They're going, look how much China is linked with Russia. This is not news, by the way. They have crossed thresholds over subsequent months for the past really 6-7 months on biggest trading partners. So we've seen countries like India and China take over from other countries that were trading with Russia, and they're now some of the biggest, or in some of those sectors, the biggest trading partners that Russia has, which also is yet another reason why these sanctions just are not going to work. And it still bemuses me why they're continuing to push on with the idea of sanctions when it's clearly not working. But anyway, that aside, all of a sudden, yep, China, big bad China, look, they're in bed with Russia. As I said, there was a meeting, and then who came out with this? I want to say maybe Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal all of a sudden pops out with a story about Xi Jinping is preparing to visit Moscow. So He's going to head over to Moscow, big ties there. And the subtext of this story was military support. And as soon as that story hit, it proliferated. And it's interesting, right? I'm in no way an intelligence officer or gatherer or anything like that. I'm a dullard. I just try and make myself a little less dullard every day by peering through the veil as much as I can, which I'll admit is not very far. But one of the things within intelligence circles that you can be told about, that I've learned from intelligence people, is to look out for something called circular reporting. So circular reporting is, where does the source of information come from? So Wall Street Journal has dropped this bombshell story, and then all of a sudden it proliferated out, and it was expanded upon. But yep, military support, all this, blah blah blah. Where is that information actually coming from, and what are the sources of it, and what are the leanings or links of those sources? So, for example, this story here, Wall Street Journal, very much mainstream media, very much, I would argue, in the pocket of the US government at the moment. And there are some signs that this kind of information has been given to them by high sources within the US government in order for them to put it out. As soon as it came out, there was a number of other stories, and you can look at that and go, this is corroboration of that story. It must be true. However, I went through a number of those stories. There was at least 4 that I looked at that I was like, oh, okay, hang on, what's the source here? Click through, went through to the source. It's this one article from Wall Street Journal. So this is how the propaganda machine works, essentially. And other media sources still look on Wall Street Journal as, being reputable, I guess. I think it's beneficial to not really look at anything as reputable when we're getting information from mainstream media. A healthy level of skepticism, I think, is beneficial nowadays. So that's what I've done here. I've looked at that and gone like, okay. I'm not saying that this meeting isn't going to happen. I think that it is well within the likelihood of happening right now. But we've seen other developments come out from this. Is very much squarely sitting in that anti-China sentiment, which I've talked about this before. When the propaganda war starts, in order to fight a war with someone, you have to convince a population to hate them. They have to be the bad guy. All right, you won't get anywhere in a war if you don't do that. So I'm very sensitive to seeing that kind of information. When I see it, I'm like, yep, you're doing it. You're doing the thing. By turning the China into part of the Russia. And I think US has done a great campaign from a PA perspective of painting Russia equals bad. And your normies, your mainstream people have just eaten that wholesale. Eyes glazed over, mouth open, a bit of drool coming out, nodding head, Russia bad. Again, I'm not saying that I agree with what Russia has done or what they're doing. I see there are reasons for what they're doing, but I try as much as possible not to paint an entire nation with the same brush, tar them with the same brush, because I'm sure there are Russians who don't support what's going on. I'm sure that there's some Russians who don't know or don't care about what's going on in Ukraine right now so much. What you're looking at there is the headshed that's actually enforcing this war. And that's maybe, if you're going to focus any sort of hatred, that's maybe where you want to focus it. But anyway, that's beside the point. Anti-China sentiment. So some more stories that have come up overnight. If I can dig it up. Where are we? Right, this one coming out of, this was sent to me by my main source on Instagram from Der Spiegel in Germany, in Deutschland, which I don't know much about Der Spiegel, what kind of leaning it is and where it goes, but just from reading a couple of articles here, I can kind of have a guess that it might be in the very same vein as some of the ones that I was just mentioning. They found China might be providing offensive support to Russia. So this is a marked step up in that information. And this is actually quite serious, I think, from the World War III perspective. if China is entering into the fray by supplying Russia with weaponry and technology, then that's a pretty clear sign that this entire thing is escalating. So the rumor is, this is what's going around, this is what they're spreading out there, that China is currently in talks to supply combat drones. In fact, there was even a rumor that a large shipment had moved from China to Russia. And again, the rumor, innuendo, spin cycle, propaganda machine was saying that this was testers for a a Chinese version going to the Russians of kamikaze drones, or suicide drones, or whatever you want to call them. So we'll wait and see, I guess. Is that happening? We don't know. Could it be happening? That is well within the realms of possibility. And to be honest, wouldn't surprise me that much. China would be looking at this much from, I believe, from a less ideological standpoint, which is what the US propaganda machine, at least from my reading, is trying to paint it as. China is forming the axis of evil. Look, they're in on this thing. They want to get in on it. So we're building that guilt of association. But I would, if I had to hazard a guess, if I was an alien species coming down and looking at Earth, I'd be like, oh yeah, this financial thing that these humans are weirdly doing, China's just doing this from a financial reason. So that's what it looks like to me. So Russia's come to them and said, hey, we're supplying you with a lot of stuff right now. We're like making a lot of money off that. You know what? We could do some other things. Maybe you could supply us with some of that cool tech you have. Some of that cool tech might also require the ongoing use and manufacturing of something called a semiconductor. That would require Taiwan. So you see where this is kind of heading now in a very broad sense. I'm not like saying A equals B equals C. That's the way it's going to go. I'm just saying that if China is actually supplying wholesale weapon manufacturing for other countries, and Russia being one of those countries, and Russia being involved in quite a substantial war right now, and that technology being very advanced technology, then what I'm looking at, I'm kind of reading the tea leaves or testing the wind here and going, that's going to increase the probability of China securing Taiwan in their own minds, the reunification of Taiwan to the motherland. They call it motherland? I think they might. Anyway. So yeah, that's what's roughly going on in this area here. I'm not going to go into any more depth on that. There's a number of stories here. I'm just going to kind of glaze over them for now. I didn't really order my stuff this morning, but I'm going to try and bring some sort of sense to it, or maybe not. Maybe I'm just going to spew this stuff out and you can try and figure it out yourself. This one was a big one that came out a few days ago. UK will be sending out message test alerts to citizens warning of preparations for world war. Quite an inflammatory article, this particular one, but allegedly that's what they're doing. They're going to be sending out these alert systems to say, hey, this is a national alert system, which already it's already in existence in many nations across the world. But this is the UK ramping it up a little bit. I kind of look at this and I go, this is UK maybe preparing or testing the waters for their population to let them know, like, hey, this is a possibility. This could actually happen. We could be thrust into some sort of conflict very soon. So just be warned. Why are they doing that? I don't think they're doing it overtly. They're not coming out and saying, hey, we're going to go into war, because like I said, maybe yesterday or the day before, that would create panic. Any sort of information like that's instantly going to create panic. Like, oh, yep, those things that we shot down, they're definitely aliens. People would flip out. So they're not going to do anything like that. I believe governments would withhold information up until, like, you could like literally be watching tanks go down your street with Z written on them, and they're, firing and destroying stuff around you. And you could, it wouldn't surprise me if I was watching the TV at that point and the government was sitting there going, no, there's no invasion. This is actually just a military exercise. Everyone just remain calm. So I don't believe anything the government has to say, essentially, with this. So Yeah, this I think this would be their form of kind of testing the waters and getting people prepared without actually saying, "Hey, we could go into World War III." The other part of this is UK. I don't think is in a great position, and they know it personally, internally. Food systems are breaking down. Energy systems are broken within that country. They are the government. I think is sitting there and looking at the what do you call it, arithmetic, the the math of this, and going, I don't know how we're going to get through this. I don't know how we're actually going to make this work. Right, we need a distraction. Balloons aren't enough. Harry and Meghan are not enough. Ooh, do we have any good soccer stars that could, be caught in some sort of controversy right now? That's probably not going to be enough. I know what's going to polarize and solidify a nation. Let's get them fearing something. Let's get them fearing World War III. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. If I was a government, that's the nefarious shit that I'd probably think about doing. That's why I'm not a government. Savage Wild says the Moldova Transnistria story could get spicy. Yes, I've got a bunch on this. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it, but the Moldova situation is it's got the potential to spew out into a huge thing right now. In fact, you know what? I'm going to dig up that story and I'm just going to talk about it right now. All right. Moldova update reports that Russia planned to seize the airport to fly in Russian troops. So let's take a step back for a moment. What does this mean? What's going on here? When I say Moldova, when I say Transnistria, what does all this mean? So you can think of it a little bit like this. There is Russia obviously used to border up against Europe as we know it now, beyond Europe as we know it now, as part of the USSR. And there are parts as when they were shrinking or when they were shifting borders that were actually happening and nations were coming back into creation or were being created themselves, that a lot of places sort of went, well, we don't know what to do with this spot. It was kind of Russian before it was Russian. We don't really know what it was. So I guess Russia still has it. So you've got enclaves and things like that around that actually muddy the waters of this picture. It's not this clear line that just goes like, here's the Iron Curtain, there's Russia, there's everything else. Transnistria is part of Moldova, but for those who don't know, Moldova borders up against Ukraine. So you can see like the proximity here and the issue. So there's been a lot of talk about Russia moving beyond the borders of Ukraine, even right from the start of this conflict. Which happy birthday! It was at 1 year old, I think, yesterday or the day before. Even before the start of it, that was already being talked about. So the whole time this has been kind of hinted at. Yes, this could spill over the borders. This could spill over the borders. It's one of the boogeymen that I think the Western propaganda machine has been using quite a bit to be like, Russians, yep, today Ukraine, tomorrow the UK and France and Germany and then Australia, and then Russians are going to take over the White House. So we better fight Ukraine now. We better push all the money into Ukraine. That's what we've got to do. That's part of the propaganda machine. As one of the issues with that, though, is that if you increase the fear, you also kind of increase the likelihood of it happening in a weird way. But Moldova is definitely in the firing line, and especially in the last month or two, has been talked about quite a lot about being really actually quite close to having Russia push in there, because Russia kind of already has. So I've talked about this on previous SitRep set, the Russian tactics, the softening techniques, the what you might consider part of fifth generation warfare, where warfare isn't just troops lining up anymore and taking shots at each other. It's not trench warfare. It's not even guerrilla warfare. We're in something else now. And the battle space is everywhere. It's right here on this medium that you're using right now to listen to me or to watch me. It is absolutely everywhere, but it is messing with a population, with a government, to soften them, to decrease their power. And so then when Russia does actually move in with force in a physical sense, it's easier for them to do it. So that's essentially what we have going on in Moldova. There was, and I don't know where the line is here of truth, and it's very, very muddy and very confusing, because you've got Moldova, the government coming out and saying, hey, we've got Russians operating, they're trying to destabilize our government. And you can see that in that there is riots, protests, and things like that are anti-government. But also, you've also got the other side saying, no, we actually don't like the government. The government's doing shitty things and they are grabbing power. And so you can look at it and you go, actually, yeah, they are passing a few things that kind of solidify their power in that kind of totalitarian 1984, what we've seen in the past 3 years, COVID types of shit. So where the actual line is here, I don't really know. But they are worried about it. And from this reporting has totally been from the West side, been the pro-Moldovan government side. They've said, they're planning a coup. And then a couple of days later, we stopped the coup. I'm like, all right, cool. Do you have anyone to corroborate that? No, just trust us. We knew they were going to do it. We had a foreign intelligence service actually tell us that, which was the Ukraine. Ukraine came in and said, hey, by the way, the Russians are about to invade you and are about to conduct a coup on you. So look out for that. And then they stopped the coup. So good for them. And it totally could have been true. I don't know. All right, I'm not part of the intelligence on the ground there. So here's another one, though. They said that Russians were going to try and take the airport so that they could fly in Russian troops. But yeah, it's you got to ask some interesting questions here. I think would it benefit Russia to actually do this? Like, you can argue yes, that there might be some benefit to do it, but maybe not right now. I think they might be a bit preoccupied with what they're doing at the moment. But then also this would, if they could get that foothold in Moldova, in the Moldova region, in Transnistria, they would actually start to envelop in a Pac-Man style Ukraine. So it would be yet another avenue that Ukraine would be kind of stuck from, I guess, or would stop supplies or aid coming in. Yeah, there's a lot more to this story. There's a lot more going on. There's a lot more kind of intrigue and ties that you can dig into this. But this is the main moving parts of what we're seeing here. Savage the Wild asked, did Putin finalize his rejection of Moldovan sovereignty? So he that was the big thing. So apparently he has come through and said, no, Moldova is not a sovereign nation. Which again is par for the course of what historically we can kind of see with what Russia does. Destabilization of governments. Then announcement of breakaway states, breakaway parts, declaring independence there. So nullifying sovereignty of countries, saying no, i.e. Donbass region, no, Ukraine, you don't know shit. That's not your land. They're their own people. Okay, now we're going to go defend those people because they've asked for our help, and we will do it. Oh, now they've just happened to say, oh, it was so good that you defended us. We want to come up. We want to be part of Russia. So that's essentially what happened in Donbass. That was the role or the timeline that happened. And that's what we can kind of see here happening in Moldova right now. Quite concerning because, this is another push in the opposite direction towards NATO. And so the way I look at it, I assess it, I go, well, this is a marked increase in the likelihood of a larger war. So you'll see these stories come up. Whenever you see anything about Moldova right now, you might want to pay attention about it. There has been this thing, I've seen many, many Moldovan stories come out and people are just like, okay, where? Moldova? Isn't that near Greece? What? What's that got to do with anything? This is a hot spot right now. This is an increase, and this could be the blowout that we've all kind of been hoping would not happen. Just an interesting fun fact, pushed up against Moldova is Romania. I've talked about this in the past, that they've actually talked about reunifying or sort of maybe, I don't think quite at the level of becoming the one country, but at least from a military standpoint saying, yeah, let's work together in this kind of thing, not work together like, yeah, we'll do this, you do that, like interlinking their military forces, because Moldova knows it can't defend itself against Russia. It 100% knows that and will admit that. They're just like, no, we're not in the same ballpark, even close to the same ballpark. And especially if Russia does what Russia is doing there right now, then we're going to have no hope. So we're going to need Romania. One of the other parts of that is Romania, NATO. You're starting to look at a different sized fish to take a bite of. But just an interesting fun fact there's still approximately 4,000 troops from the 101st Airborne, that's the US of A troops, 101st Airborne in Romania at an airbase that I cannot pronounce and will not even try. Mihail, something starting with K, and then a whole heap of letters. I usually give these things a crack too, in a very amusing way, but I'm not going to today. These are some of the closest US troops to the action in Ukraine. That it was a big story when these guys came into town, into Europe, and then not much has been talked about it. So they've been just sitting there doing what soldiers do, waiting for war. So some interesting stuff going on there in this part of the world. There is some stories too of NATO standard armored vehicles moving into Moldova. So they've been supplying Moldova with some stuff. So some really interesting build-up that's going on in this area. Here's another bit. Russia source re-provocation. Ukraine is preparing an armed provocation against Transnistria and plans to stage the offensive of Russian troops from the territory of the unrecognized republic, the Russian Defense Ministry said in its Telegram channel. All right, what does that mean? Here's the absolute muddying of the water, and here is warfare in news. So like I said, warfare isn't restricted to two dudes shooting out at each other anymore. Weaponized news, counter narrative, pre-counter narrative, getting ahead of the game, getting ahead of someone else and confusing the matter. And this is US politics 101 right now. But what they're doing here, Russia's essentially come out and said, hey, Ukraine is about to attack Moldova. What? Why would Ukraine attack Moldova? Because they're going to do it in Russian uniforms and they're going to blame us. It's not us. Is that true? Or is Russia going to attack them and then go, we told you it was Ukraine? So you can see how this is starting to get really muddy right now. Savage the Wild says, nuclear warfare training is what some of my buddies in Romania said. Lol. Lol's just practicing for a little bit of a nuclear. Dust that fall out off your shoulder. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, that would be part of the training that they would be doing, because in this particular war, this is one of the reasons that I look at this war so much, because it's over the other side of the world. It has the potential to go nuclear. If it goes nuclear, then this is a whole different thing. All right, that's a whole different thing. All right, the world changes entirely. I know the world is changing quite a lot, almost daily right now, but that is like, it's change. That is change. Everything is different. So Russia, as I said, was saying that Ukraine is going to do a false flag. That's food. I've got some other stories here that I can't find. Well, I'll just talk about this. So jumping back over to China right now, a number of stories, and I'll flick through them here. We've got one from where was this coming out of? Wall Street Journal, I think, again, who's been just pumping the propaganda recently. So Pentagon has come out and said, China is supplying Russia. So again, Wall Street Journal broke this news, Pentagon pushing this news out. China, bad. China equals Russia equals bad. You all get that. Then hand in hand with that, within 24 hours, the US is going to expand its number of troops in Taiwan. All right. The numbers they're talking about, they're going to triple or quadruple the amount of troops on the ground in Taiwan. This is huge news. I mean, I'm saying that a bit facetiously. It is kind of big news, all right? But just pump the brakes for a sec. How many troops do they have on the ground at the moment? It's somewhere between 30 to 50. It's training teams, right? So they're looking at going to 100, 200 people on the ground. It's still big news, okay? It's still provocation. It's still pushing us closer towards war and in another theater. But also, check the facts on that one. Like, I just thought that was interesting. I'm like, well, because when they said it, I was like, wait, what troops in Taiwan? So I looked it up and I'm like, yeah, they've got 30 or 50 troops at the moment. Troops. You often see this, like, we talk about troops and deployments and things like that, especially like Australia did this for a while. We had troops on the ground in Iraq and other places in the world. A lot of the time that was like 5 people, 10 people that were doing training roles or were like admin type people. So yeah, you got to be a bit careful with this sort of information. But again, the fact that this information is being spread far and wide throughout mainstream media at the moment, that it is kind of clear to me that this is less about a genuine news story and journalists doing their integral best to get honest, good information out to people so they're informed, and more that the US government wants this information out and wants people to know it and wants people to be preset for the idea and a little bit in fear of the Chinese threat. Because, yeah, number of different stories from this and another number of other couple of things here. So Pentagon coming out, have actually threatened China over arming Russia. The kickback, the inevitable kickback that's going to come from this is going to be interesting too, what China actually says and does against this. US may release intelligence showing China poised to transfer arms to Russia. So this was an interesting one to me because everyone's going, it went from basically this headline: China supplying Russia with arms. Pentagon says that China should not supply arms to Russia. So there was a step there that if you weren't paying attention, you might have missed it, where they're definitely doing it to the US coming out and saying, hey, you shouldn't do it. And then the US government coming out and say, hey, we might release intelligence that China could be in the future poised to or ready to send arms to Russia. Those 2 points are very, very far away from each other. Okay. Intelligence that they may or are ready to or could is very different from them doing it. But again, most people won't read that as what I just said. They'll read it as, oh, China's bad. They're part of this war. They're in it. 300 Survival on YouTube says Iran is also supporting Russia. That's correct. Which was another interesting thing, actually, because Russia, I know it was reported that Russia was buying drone technology that Iran was pumping out. So the fact that then the story went to, and I've talked about the anti-Iran propaganda quite a bit, that we are all getting fed a steady stream of Iran hate right now. It's interesting then that they said, oh, China's going to be supplying them with drones. I'm like, aren't they already getting them off? China's going to be supplying Russia with drones. I'm like, aren't they already getting that off Iran? Okay. So they're just doubling up. Not a bad idea, I guess, doubling up on these sorts of things. But yeah, interesting. Wall Street Journal. Unsurprisingly, US intelligence says China may start supplying weapons to Russia. I'm not even going to go into these stories. It's not that important. Wall Street Journal again says US to expand troop presence in Taiwan for training against China threat. Yeah, at this point, I don't know how you. Anytime I see WSJ on a story when it goes to source, I'm just like, oh, okay. What's the US government? What's Pentagon want people to know now? Why Pentagon just don't do their own press releases? Why they have to go through WSJ? Beyond me, but because people still believe, I guess. That's more stories. This is all the same stories, just from different angles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm not going to go through them. It's redundant, really, but just to show you how much of this information is coming out in different sources. Same freaking information, and you can even read sentences that if I was writing a university report, I would get pulled up for plagiarism. I'm like, how's this journalism? You've just gone to the Wall Street Journal, gone copy paste. Is that okay? Good thing people only ever read one source of information. This one sent to me from my source, Romania-insider.com. Romania stands by Moldova under any scenario, President says. That's some pretty big words there. So they've basically come out and said, whatever happens, we got you, fam. We're in your corner. So that's a pretty big thing. Again, jumping back to the Moldova thing, I know I'm all over the shop today. Here's another story that was sent to me that was quite interesting, because it is another facet of what we're talking about with the Russian-China, the Russo-Sino relations. This story was from Bloomberg, I believe. I'm pretty sure it was Bloomberg. Russia and China have a stranglehold on the world's food security. Again, I like contextual information. I like background information. You look at something like China bad, Russia weapons entering war, because everyone's taken the pill. Not everyone, but like a lot of normies have taken the pill and gone like, yes, Russia bad. Quick, fuck! I need to put a Ukraine flag on my bio, just so everyone knows. I need to put a Ukraine flag out the front of my house, for fuck's sake, just so people know. Because otherwise, how will people know how virtuous I am? So people have eaten that pill, and then you can make the link. You can do guilt by association from there, and that's kind of what they're doing with China. But if I'm a government, I'm like, shit, Russia, China, they actually control in different ways, but they do control the world's food supply in many, many different ways, in different forms. How do we destabilize that? Because right now, oddly enough, I think the US has been trying to destabilize the BRICS, and I think they've been doing it the exact wrong way. Everything that they have done to try and destabilize it has actually strengthened it. And I think what they're doing now, by creating the common enemy for Russia and China to work together against, is actually strengthening their control of food supply. To name one thing, all right, food supply, food growing supply, fertilizer supply, even petrochemical supply, coal, gas, you name it. These guys have it, or they have control of it. Interesting background. All right, this is the sort of stuff that I think about. Is like, what else is going on here? Why would they want to paint China as the bad nation that it clearly is, according to the US? All right, what else we got going on here? No, I'm not going to talk about that. A couple of earthquakes have happened recently. 6.8 earthquake struck Tajikistan. For those who don't know where Tajikistan is, I don't blame you. It's kind of squeezed in between a whole heap of other stands and sort of northeastern Afghanistan area. South of Russia, west of China. This earthquake hit in a place that was pretty much unpopulated by the sounds of it. There doesn't appear to be any deaths or anything like that. But you know me, I always like to put out earthquake sort of stuff. I'm fascinated by them now, and especially now that I've gone down the rabbit hole of looking at the effects from solar or from space weather, particularly from solar activity, and the correlation to earthquake activity. Interestingly, I didn't grab this story, but I did see it somewhere on some form this morning, in the wee hours of this morning, that there was a earthquake in Indonesia. I think it was 5.8 earthquake in Indonesia, one of the islands of Indonesia. That's a bit close to my home. But I don't know much about that story apart from that it was in Indonesia and it was 5 point something. So yet another one. Interesting. Here's another interesting one that I saw. Chinese lithium prices fall 30% as demand for electronic vehicles weakens. So EVs, the hot thing, we're all going to EVs in 5 years. Apparently demand has weakened off. I talked about lithium prices in the past where they jumped dramatically. They went up and they stayed up for a long time. Well, now they've gone down a little bit, dipped down a little bit. Why is this important? Because lithium rechargeable batteries, things like that, as a prepper, these are the sorts of things that I look at if I'm going to buy some, Life Pro batteries or something like that. Your lithium ion type batteries, or whatever form of batteries you're going to get, but lithium being one of the constituent products in that increase in price of lithium is going to equal increase in price of batteries. So I look at that kind of thing. I go, oh, okay. When it was going up, I said, now's maybe a time you want to buy some lithium batteries. Now that it's going down, now I'm going to keep my eye on this and see how far it goes down. And again, we might see a dip in the end product. So might be another good time to purchase if you're one of those people who follows such things or needs lithium batteries. All right. So what else we got here? Another Moldova update. Oh no, that was just about the runway. Food security update. Countries hoarding onions. This sent to me this morning from a main source. Another party from New Delhi in India. And what have they got to do with it? Anyway, I'm just going to go to the story here. It's from Bloomberg. Hoarding onions threatens a new chapter in global food crisis. So the interesting part about this story, it's a very fascinating story, and maybe go look it up if you want to. They basically looked at tops. The top TOP, quite often it's grain. It's rice, it's wheat, it's corn, all these sorts of things. But these other products, tomatoes, onions, potatoes, are eaten by a large amount of the world, most of the world. And so they're very, very important. So now if we've got countries that are starting to hoard this, looking at India, and they're going like, okay, maybe we can't be sending all our food out, seeing that we've got the second largest population on Earth within our borders, and that's soon to be the largest population of human beings on Earth. Maybe we need to actually start holding on to a bit of our food. So onions and things like that. And as we've seen in the past, anytime a nation does this, some other nation hurts because we have a globalized system. So what does it matter that Indonesia puts a restriction on palm oil? Well, it matters because they are one of the biggest, if not the biggest, exporter of palm oil, and palm oil is used throughout the world. In some countries, it is solely used. That's their number one source. And so when Indonesia says, hey, we can't send this out right now, they go without. And that's a big problem. So when places like India, who are gearing up, they're trying as hard as they can be to be the world's breadbasket. That's one of the positions they're trying to take. All of a sudden go, no tomatoes, no onions, no potatoes. Well, think potato famine Ireland a couple hundred years ago, and now expand that out to large swathes of the earth, entire nations, plural, all of a sudden going, we can't feed our people. We are in trouble. 300 Survival on YouTube says Indonesia was 6.3. Thank you very much for the correction there. Chile 5.5 and Vanuatu 5.3, all happening in the past 5 days. So a lot of earthquake activity, not volcanic, earthquake activity happening recently. Again, I'll always talk about this. I don't know if I'm noticing it more, so it's just a bit of like research bias or something like that, that I'm looking for it more, that I'm seeing it more, or if we are actually in a period of more earthquakes at the moment, more seismic activity. That's it. No, it's not. No, I skipped over something. It was about food in New Zealand and UK. So this one coming out of New Zealand, UK has had some issues with food. Starting to see supermarket shelves that are bare, starting to see prices that are increasing to a ridiculous amount, starting to see food that is locked up, things like butter locked up, staple foods locked up behind lock and key. They've had a bit of this in New Zealand. So a story coming out from this particular one was sent to me by my main source, but it was from stuff.co.nz. We produce enough food for 40 million. So why are our supermarket shelves bare? That's a really good question, New Zealand. So places like Australia and New Zealand, US, we're food surplus. We are net exporters of food, which is one of the reasons why whenever I'm talking about food crisis and things like that, I'm saying, yeah, you should stock up food. You should have that sort of stuff, but you don't necessarily need to go freak out about it, because places like Australia, New Zealand, US are going to be in a better standing. Places like France as well, better standing than a lot of other countries. If push comes to shove and we have to go like, all right, no, we can't keep exporting all this, then we're going to have enough for us. Okay. So NZ can produce enough food for 40 million people. I'll give you the hot tip. The population of NZ is not 40 million people. I don't know what it is. I'm thinking like 4 million, maybe 8. I'm not sure. Any in New Zealand, Kazi Bros want to correct me on that, then let me know. But it's very low. Australia is like 28 million, to give you an example here. So we produce way more food than we have humans that are going to eat it. So why would our shelves be bare? Why would our shelves ever be bare? Because they have done it here in Australia. It has happened in the past 12 months. Why is this happening? And it's because of the food systems, because of how it works. And small disruptions can cause huge problems. And like, I hate to say it, but we're still in the hangover of what we did for the past 3 years through lockdowns. We're still getting messed around with that. Then you've got weather patterns on top of that are a bit out of whack. So a lot of different circumstances that are going on here. But this one, interesting quote. Rush said that Rush, being the person who was talking about this, said that there needed to be a national food plan and better storage of food supplies to be able to make it through further events without disruption to the food network. I'm pretty sure that's communism. Personally, I don't like this sort of stuff. One of the things I always try and tell people on this channel is that we should be self-responsible. It's not up to a government to go, okay, I got to make sure everyone's got the food for everyone. That's how government came about, I think. There was a surplus of food and they said, oh, well, somebody's got to look after this and distribute it, so it should be us. The further you give that power to that entity, the closer you get to communism, which, communism, I think would work for around 150 people. But over that, 152 people, not so much. 3,500 people, no. Now you're really starting to screw some people over. 28 million people, 360 million people, 1.5 billion people. No. That's not good. This is where people wholesale get smeared under the wheels of equality and governance. So I don't like it. I think the responsibility should be put back on individuals to start to take control of their own food supply. And that's one thing that I always say to people, like, we have to take control of our own food supply. as much as we can. I know it's hard, getting to 100% might not be realistic for you with the way you've set up your life. That's fine. But what can you get to? Can you get to 90? Can you get to 80? Can you get to 60%? Can you get to 30% controlling your food system? Shit, can you grow 5% of your food? Start there. Do that. So yeah, I find this kind of talk a bit disturbing, and it's not like this talk is somewhere in China or something. This is in New Zealand. So that makes it particularly disturbing to me. There needs to be a whole system response driven by the principle of feeding New Zealand people first and well. Dr. Sally McKay and Associate Professor Lisa T. Morenga, both of the Food Export Group of Health Coalition Aotearoa, agreed. We have a food security problem in New Zealand, not just during emergencies like Cyclone Gabrielle, but all the time. We shouldn't. That's the thing. If you're in a country that has under 10 million people and you're producing 40 million people worth of food, 40 million people's worth of food, then people should never go hungry. People should never go hungry. Disturbing science. This is the food system. This is what I'm talking about. We created a system that's a freaking monster, and now it's got a couple of hiccups in there, and it is all falling apart. Trad Truther says, are Australians more like Europeans or Americans? I want to say Europeans. That's not true for every Australian, but I think... yeah, or Europeans, we're probably more like UK people, but different. Australians, we're a varied species, okay? But if you look at the trends of Australians, we are slow in adaptation to newer technologies in a lot of ways, but very fast in other ways. So we have a conservative core, but an outer shell of very liberal, very progressive ideals. But I would say if there was one thing that I could define your normal Aussie as, I would say probably a rule follower, which is interesting if you say that to a lot of Aussies, because a lot of people will disagree with that. But that's my perspective on it, that a lot of Aussies are rule followers. And would fit in and obey rules first before thinking about, what's actually the greater good or what's best for everyone. So the thing I love about when I go to the US, I talk about their freedom. They're like, oh, we haven't got freedoms because we have to do this, and this now. And I'm like, yeah, but go to Australia and see what I mean. You can go and buy a gun, and people go, it's crazy you can go and buy a gun. It's like, well, yeah, I guess, but also, like, they don't treat their individual citizens necessarily, depending on the state you're in, like a child, like an idiot, like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. They treat them like an adult, and then if they stuff up, then they come down on them. And that's something that I would like to see more of in the world. If you get pulled over in the US, they have to have very good reason to think that you are intoxicated in order to start the testing for you to then be drug tested or alcohol tested. In Australia, if you get stopped, and you can get stopped for no reason by any cop in any car, and they will all test you as a matter of course for alcohol. It doesn't matter if you have not touched a drop of alcohol in your life and you are driving perfectly in the speed limit. If there is a police behind you and they go, I'm bored, woo, they'll pull you over, and you have to. You must comply. There's nothing you can do about that. So that's a weird example, but you can see the difference there in the Australian mindset. And most Aussies won't think twice about that. They'll be like, yeah, of course. It keeps us safe, right? That's what it does. The numbers don't lie. We're all safer now. That's one of the reasons why we saw such madness over the past 3 years, is that the majority of Aussies will just do what they're told. I like to frame it like this. We come from a penal colony. We were a prison. We came here and we had an overlord, and they told us what to do, and we did it. And if we did it right for long enough, then they gave us a little bit, they granted us a little bit of freedom. Here you go, here's a bit of farmland, and you can work on that farmland and you can pay your taxes to us, but you're not a prisoner anymore. All right, you're not a slave anymore. That's the genesis of this nation, as far back as the colonization, when white folk came to this part of the land, part of the world. So, and that's the governance that we use today. So that's why I use that example. So that's where it's come from. So I'd say in that way we're much more like, well, Europeans, but UK people, because UK aren't really like Europeans a lot of the time. But yeah, then you got your redneck Aussies, probably more closer to American. And we idolize the rule breaker too. There's this zeitgeist, a kind of a meme that flows through the Aussie mindset of worshipping those who break the rules. If you look at a lot of Aussie literature, you look at a lot of Aussie movies and TV shows, criminal. There's a lot of criminal that goes on there. Even things like one of the big historical events within our country is called the Eureka Stockade. It was the rebellion against the evil British overlords, which got ounced. We got spanked. It did not work. Unlike the US War of Independence, ours got put down very quickly, but people still, learn it in schools, and people still like hold it up as like, oh, look at what these people still, learn it in schools, and people still like hold it up as like, oh, look at what these people did. If you said the word Ned Kelly to any Aussie, they go, yeah, Ned Kelly, such is life. He was a rebel. He was a criminal. He, killed people. He killed cops. And yet no Aussie really, he's a bad guy, right? But no Aussie thinks of him as a real bad guy. It's just part of the Aussie culture. So there is this kind of worshipping of the rule breaker, but it's just that. It's this pedestalization of rule breaking. Oh, I don't want to do it myself. But that's your normal Aussies. That's not all Aussies. Certainly, there's plenty of Aussies around nowadays who are willing to stand up for their own rights and for the rights of others. And hopefully, there's more of them getting born every day. Norman Lacey says, young Aussies seem to be more like Americans, but as they mature, they become more like UK. Yeah, possibly. I mean, we get saturated with US propaganda and movies and TV shows and stuff like that. So there's always that tendency towards that emulation of those things that you worship. All right. Hope that was an interesting insight for everyone. I'm going to wrap it up there because it's almost been an hour on this one. Thank you very much for joining me. As always, I really appreciate it. These were all the stories from the last few days. I was supposed to do yesterday, but didn't. So got that out, kind of cleared the slate now, and we'll look for some more new and interesting stuff. But as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot them through. I'm always looking for good questions. I like the questions. It's, in fact, my favorite way to transmit information is through conversation and through question and answer. I find it very difficult to go like, okay, here's a subject and I'm going to let you on the subject. I much more prefer having it elicited out of me somehow. So if you do have questions, send them through. If you've got any interesting stories that you see, also send them through. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for listening. And as always, keep prepping, keep your eyes open, keep gardening. And until next time, Semper Paratus.